And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brendon Hodges. This is CBB Review's flagship podcast, also known as The Review. Thank you guys for following us. Two writers here today to join me. No starting five, of course, because I wasn't able to come up with anything to convince you guys of today. And we have one returner sporting a wonderful Navy basketball shirt by the looks of it, even though I'm pretty sure he's a Wofford fan. Matt Waldman back on the program for the second time this year and making his debut. And looks about as young as his time on this podcast is Mr. Steve Kirck. Guys, pleasure to have you on. How are you doing today?
I am doing fine, dealing with a little winter storm, but thrilled to be joining you. And I don't know if I'm probably the elder statesman of the bunch.
I'm happy to be here as well. Yeah, it was a good observation. So I am a Wofford alum and fan, first and foremost, but not too far from Annapolis myself, and I've always been a Navy fan as well. So happy to see them making a run in the Patriot League this year.
Oh, we got a ton to talk about, and I've had my fair share of run-ins with Patriot League lacrosse over winter break, calling fake games. For now, though, we're talking college basketball, and like I said, no starting five. We're just hopping straight into everything today, everyone. First topic of the day, though, guys, it's February 1st, start of a new month. There's snow falling, as Steve pointed out, and it's going to be falling for a while. But what we do know is that Selection Sunday is just over a month away. For all you math majors out there, that's a very short period of time for these teams to build up their resumes, get themselves into consideration for the tournament, or maybe win one of those outright bids by winning their conference tournament. With that being said, though, we can pretty much say for sure this field is going to be a lot different than we usually see. Usually you have a Duke or a Kentucky or a Kansas way up at the top, and then really none of them are at the bottom. It's different this year. Some of those teams have struggled, and there's not a lot of time for them to boost themselves back into consideration for either being in the tournament or being a top row seed. So we'll start with this. Guys, out of all the blue bloods in the NCAA, I'm talking Duke, Kentucky, Kansas. We can throw Villanova in there as well. Storied programs. Which one of these teams is dead and buried? They're not going to make the tournament this year. Let's go ahead, start with the debutantes, Steve, and then we'll go on to Matt.
All right, I'll go first here. And I'm a big Kentucky fan. It pains me to say this, but barring a run in the SEC tournament, I don't see how my Wildcats punch a ticket to the dance. If they don't win out the rest of the regular season, if they win every single game, which they haven't really shown the propensity to do that, I can't see how they have their name called on Selection Sunday. Do they have the talent to win, 3 games in 3 days in Nashville? Yes, they do. But they haven't put together a streak like that all year. So reluctantly and begrudgingly, I will say Kentucky.
Would you say this is I don't want to say the worst team since that Robert Morris year where they only got to the NIT and lost in the first round. Where do you see that team in comparison with this year's team?
I would say that this team is probably a little bit more talented, but that team lost Nerlens Noel, 2/3 of the way through the season, and kind of derailed their hopes. This team probably has a little bit more talent. It just hasn't meshed, and it hasn't formed into a cohesive group yet.
Fair point. Matt, your choice for the blue blood that's dead and buried in terms of tournament hopes this year.
Yeah, so, I know we like to look at differences here, but I'm kind of with Steve. Kentucky's really the only one that doesn't have a shot at this point. Everybody else has their opportunities, but sitting, at 5-10 at this point, and just 500 in the SEC, and 5 of their final 9 games are against potential NCAA teams in the SEC. So, it's an uphill climb, and like Steve said, they haven't shown that ability to be able to win or put together some type of streak that might push them back into the discussion.
Well said, guys. We'll move on to this next tier of teams, though. And while you have teams that have already fallen off the cliff, you have teams that are hanging on by that little thread of rope that's still made available to them. I like to think of these as Indiana Jones type teams from the Temple of Doom, where he's hanging off of a ladder or a bridge that's snapped in half. A bunch of guys have already fallen into the crocodile pit, and now he's just kind of hanging on and trying to save those magic stones. So which one of the blue bloods is hanging on by a thread in terms of their NCAA tournament hopes? We'll go in the same order.
All right, that puts me first. I'm going to say Duke. they're probably borderline in now versus not in. Have played well lately. I think they've won 3 in a row. Have a big one against Miami tonight. But Coach K has been a staple in the NCAA tournament, but they are by no means a guarantee at this point of the season.
I would go, and I know you didn't mention this team, Brendon, but I think a lot of people would. Michigan State, and I know it's not looked good lately, but they're just coming off a 3-week pause, but Tom Izzo is one of those coaches, just like Coach K is, where they tend to find a way with their players, and they showed a little more fight against Ohio State yesterday, and I think the Big Ten provides those opportunities to get back into the mix very quickly. A lot of Tier 1 games to go in that league, plus the Big Ten tournament. So I just can't see Michigan State missing it. It may not be pretty. It may be a 10 seed, an 11 seed, but I think they find a way. That
was the other team that I had written down, so I agree with that.
Well, quick question for both of you then. Will those teams make the tournament then? Matt, will Michigan State make the tournament this year since they're sitting on the threshold of that bubble? And the same question to you, Steve.
I think they find a way, and honestly, it may just be good enough for the play-in games, the first 4. But and maybe that's a disappointment to Spartan fans, but I think they should just be happy to get it.
I'm going to say yes to Duke because I think the ACC is not as top-heavy as the Big Ten is. Michigan State probably has a few more pitfalls on their schedule than Duke does. So I'll say Duke makes it in by the skin of their teeth. And as a Kentucky fan, that pains me to say that as well.
See, here's the thing. I don't mean this in a bad way, but you're old enough to remember the Leitner shot, so I see where that pain's coming from. I wasn't born when that happened, but I know that it happened, so I don't feel that.
I was in the Spectrum that night when he hit the shot.
Really?
Yes.
Oh boy, we're gonna have to do another series or something where we talk about these bad memories everyone has. To round this out, though, and these guys are for sure in, so I'm gonna change this part of the topic up a little bit. So there are plenty of these blue bloods that they haven't cemented their ticket, obviously, to the tournament, but they're well on their way to it. So let's narrow it down to a blue blood that you think has the best resume for a seed on the top 4 lines, and maybe give a prediction for what line they would end up on by the end of the year. Steve, and then Matt.
I'll go first with that, and I'll say Kansas. I mean, they're probably playing themselves down right now, but the Big 12 will offer them some opportunities to get some scalps, so to speak, some resume building wins where they can increase their seed line. Having said that, I actually think they'll probably wind up lower than a 4 seed when all is said and done, but they have the opportunity to play themselves to a top 4 line with the teams they have left on their schedule.
So I definitely tossed Kansas around, and I still think they have a great shot. However, I went Pac-12. I went UCLA, and that's only because it's an easier league, so it doesn't necessarily help them all the way. But they're the clear-cut favorite out there right now, and the committee likes conference champions, especially when they're looking to make comparisons. So I think Kansas has they're outside of that race right now when you look at teams like Texas and Baylor ahead of them, and even Oklahoma's making a surge of late. So I think you look at UCLA. I don't see a scenario where they lose the Pac-12, at least a regular season title. They may not get the conference tournament title, but I think they have a shot to at least crack into the 4 line.
Interesting you mentioned UCLA. That's all I'm going to say about that. That's foreshadowing, though, because there's a little bit of history that came up this last weekend when I was doing research for today. I digress. Anyway, though, we'll go ahead and take our first break of the day. Good job on the topic. One to start us off today, guys. We'll be right back 10 seconds from now, but until then, take a break if you need to. Pause the video, and we'll be right back. This is The Review.
Gee, just push the button.
Back on The Review, Brendon Hodges along with Matthew Waldman, Steve Kirck, taking you through today's, our Monday edition of this week's review of college basketball. To start this second block, though, a lot of stories happened over the weekend. Most of them we don't cover because it's really just games. But a couple of bigger ones that we wanted to touch on. These are the biggest stories from college hoops since we last saw you. The weekend, of course, got off to a solemn start, guys. News came down on Friday that Hall of Fame coach John Chaney died at the age of 89 after what sources described as a short and unspecified illness. Chaney, most known for his 24 seasons at Temple, where he led the Owls to 17 NCAA tournament appearances and 5 Elite Eights. He ended up winning 516 games there and 741 overall. And that ranks him top 40 in career wins. And he was also the first Black coach to reach 700 wins. Steve, you were actually alive when Chaney coached at Temple. And I don't think Matt or I could really attest to the role he played in college basketball. Can you?
Yeah, I mean, John Chaney was was a legend, certainly in Philadelphia basketball, certainly all across the landscape of college basketball. And his Temple teams in the late 80s, early 90s, Mark Macon was a name that I remember with a great career at Temple. And, they were perennial NCAA tournament teams, always turned out teams that were competitive and fought tooth and nail, which was just like, his mantra. Everyone probably remembers the little blow up that he had with Calipari at the press conference. And can you imagine if with Twitter today, what an experience like that would have taken a life of its own. But I think you take that aside, he molded men, he put out great teams, and even Calipari and Chaney, mended fences and became great friends. So I think the grand scheme of things of what he was able to accomplish in his life transcended basketball. And Cal and Chaney, like I said, they melded, that relationship and became good friends, which I think is a life lesson for all of us.
Good stuff. We'll move on to what actually happened this past week in terms of game action. SEC Big 12 Challenge. 10 games scheduled, 9 took place because Steve's Kentucky Wildcats had some COVID positives in their camp. So only 9 games played. Out of the 18 teams that did play, though, 8 were ranked in the top 25. Now, when it's all said and done, the SEC ends up winning the challenge outright, 5-4, only the second time they've done that in its 8-year history, mostly because they usually played 10 games, and it's really easy to go 5-5 when you think about it. So out of the 9 games played, Matt, was there any one game that's result was surprising to you?
I would probably say the most surprising to me was the Florida-West Virginia game, just because Florida had really been inconsistent this year. For every good win they pick up, they drop one that's kind of a head scratcher. And so, and that happens in league play a lot. So to get this non-conference test kind of late January, right a month away from Selection Sunday, I think it was just what they needed to show, hey, all right, we go through the ups and downs of conference play, but when it comes to playing teams outside of our league, which is really important when it comes to tournament time, they show that they're still capable of winning a game like that.
And then finally, I mentioned Matt had referenced UCLA in the last block, but this past Saturday marked the 50-year anniversary of UCLA's 88-game win streak. On that day, I believe it was January 30th, the Bruins defeated UC Santa Barbara 74-61. Their coach had some harsh things to say about that game. It was described as ragged, and they didn't play defense that well, even though they only gave up 61 points, which is really small considering what guys are putting up today. The rest, though, as we say, was history. 88 straight wins over 1,084 days, a period of time that included victories over 45 different programs, 16 of which had national titles or now have them. Oh, and by the way, the Bruins also won 3 titles in that span as well. So I'll ask both of you guys, starting with Steve, will this streak ever be beaten? I'm going to say no. Probably not, because college basketball is just that much more competitive today. But I'd like to hear what you guys think, especially with teams like Gonzaga. And, well, let's just go with Gonzaga because they seem to be the best team out of all this year. And I don't think Drake's going to win 88 straight games. All respect to them. But when they get to the tournament, they're probably going to lose at some point.
Yeah, I think that that streak will probably live for a very long time. I can't imagine in today's landscape, somebody putting a group together. Keep in mind back then, players didn't play as freshmen and then played 3 more years. So you were looking at teams that were perennially equipped with talented players at the ages of 21 and 22 years old, and kids who are that talented now are not going to stay on a college campus for 4 years. So I think that record's pretty safe.
I really can't see it. There's just the talent level is, I would say even the gap is shrinking. I mean, you look at teams like Loyola and Drake this year, and that's just one example. You always have these mid-majors that come out, and the leagues are getting better in the mid-tier. And plus, you just don't have those dominant teams with so many one-and-dones. So you look at these teams that are cycling through players who, hey, if they stayed all 4 years and they have this great talent, They probably could run off something similar, but I just don't think it can happen in this day and age.
Well, those are the biggest stories in college hoops since we last saw you. Well done, guys. We'll move on to our second and really final topic of the day before we get to all the fun stuff. So, we've been talking a lot about the fact that we're just over a month away from Selection Sunday. And instead of just going through the rankings and saying, oh, what's this team going to do for the rest of the year? I thought we'd look on the negative side today because who doesn't like a good sob story? Who doesn't like thinking about, oh, what's the worst thing that could happen to each of these teams in the top 25 that we're probably going to see in the tournament because they're either going to win their conference or get an at-large bid because they've been just that good. So our two panelists today have split them down the middle, even though there are 25 teams and one of them had one more. I don't remember which one did. Steven did. I'm very sorry about that. Your first time on here and I made you do more work. We're going to go ahead and start, though, with the two undefeateds at the top. So Gonzaga, number one overall. That is Steven who has Gonzaga. The worst case scenario for the Bulldogs is?
I think the worst case scenario is they lose a game in the regular season, slip up, they don't win the West Coast Conference tournament, and they fall to the 2 line. I think that's probably their worst case scenario.
All right, we'll just keep going on and going on. Don't need any time for description. This is just like what we do. We're going quick here. Matt, what is Baylor's worst nightmare?
I really think it's not making the Final Four. That's the kind of team that they have, and so anything short of that, with how dominant they've been, is just a disappointment.
All right, we'll move on to the third-ranked team this week, Villanova.
I think Villanova's worst case scenario. They've had some pauses already, and if they get one at the wrong time, that could derail a season. Obviously, if they get tripped up one or two more times, they could fall to the 2 or 3 line as well, which wouldn't be certainly as disastrous if they have some issues where they can't play in March, and that would be their worst case scenario.
First, the Big Ten teams in this ranking, Michigan.
Yeah, so the Wolverines are dealing with their own pause, and so you certainly hope they don't come back flat from that. But assuming they don't, I think getting upset before the Sweet 16 would be a big disappointment. Expectations were low coming into the year, but those have slowly risen, and so I think there's a point now where they're good enough that anything short of the second weekend is disappointing.
The Houston Cougars.
That stole my thunder there because I had them as not making the second weekend. I think would be their major disappointment. They've put themselves in a position to be a 2 seed, and when you're seeded that high, if they are seeded that high come Selection Sunday, then the expectations are to get to the second weekend. So I think their worst case scenario is to get upset in that first weekend.
How about Texas?
I think Texas is a first-round upset, and I know that seems far-fetched because of how high they are and the seed that they're likely going to get. But for as well as they've done it, and for all intents and purposes, maybe push Shaka Smart off the hot seat, a loss like that would certainly, I think, ruffle some feathers in Austin for how well they've done this year.
Let's move on to and my law professor hates when I say this, the Ohio State University. She went to Purdue, by the way, so it makes sense that she'd be mad about that. But the Buckeyes.
I think the worst thing that could happen for the Ohio State University would be to fall to the 8 or 9 seed come NCAA tournament time. They played themselves pretty high at this point and have a high seed as a horizon for them. But, if they trip up down the line, they could all of a sudden see themselves in that 8-9 matchup. And you know what that means in round 2, getting the top seed.
I'm happy somebody gets that we can poke fun at each other on this. Usually people just let me dish out at them and don't try and make any comebacks, but you're the first to do that. Thank you. How about the Iowa Hawkeyes, though, Ohio State's Big Ten foe?
Look, I know they've struggled these last 2 games, but again, with how high expectations were, I think for them it's also missing the Final Four. They may never have a team like this again in program history, especially with a player like Garza who's developed so well. So you don't really want to waste an opportunity for a team that doesn't get to this high of a level of basketball that often and not get to where you want to be.
All right, the Oklahoma Sooners.
I think their pitfall could be that the Big 12 is just so tough and they got some tough games left that they could, fall down the pecking order, not only in the league, maybe have an early exit in the conference tournament, but play themselves to a much lower seed than their talent has.
The Alabama Crimson Tide.
I think the worst case scenario for Alabama is a regression over the final month. They've obviously boosted themselves up with that huge winning streak, the slip up against Oklahoma on Saturday. But this really seems like a team that you peak too early, you struggle in February, and all of a sudden you're no longer in a top 4 seed position in the tournament.
Tennessee.
I think the SEC is so weak that their floor is kind of high, if that makes sense. They've played themselves to they're probably a 2, 3, or 4 seed right now, and if they were to slip up a few times, all of a sudden they're looking at being a 4 or 5 seed, which in that Sweet 16 gets in the top seed, and their talent is much higher than being a 4 or 5 seed.
Everyone's favorite at the beginning of the year, Illinois.
Yeah, the Illini, again, another team that I think anything short of the second weekend would be disappointing. You have guys like DeSumo and Coburn there, generational players as well for Illinois. They haven't had this high of expectations since 2004, 2005. So, again, they need to get to the second weekend.
Texas Tech.
I think their worst case scenario was to not finish the regular season strong. Their schedule is pretty conducive to getting on a hot streak. TCU twice, Kansas State. They get West Virginia and Texas at home. So, they're probably going through the tougher part of their schedule. So I would say the pitfall for them would be is if they don't really go on a run at the end of the season.
All right, Virginia.
It's kind of the same old story with the Cavaliers. They're still the defending national champions, which can feel hard to believe sometimes. But we also know that they're prone to everyone's favorite upset to talk about. And so I think that's a realistic possibility again this year. They're probably not going to be a 1 seed necessarily, but their offense has plagued them at times. You look at that's the reason I think they lost to San Francisco early on. It came back against Virginia Tech this weekend. So one bad offensive game, and they could see an early exit in March.
Creighton.
Creighton is similar to Texas Tech in that their schedule is not that daunting other than 2 matchups against Villanova, which obviously will be difficult, but they should be able to play themselves into a high seed. And, their worst case scenario is they don't take care of business within a conference and can get a much lower seed than they deserve.
Virginia Tech. A lot of Virginia teams in a row here. That's I'm just going to point that out. But Virginia Tech.
Well, I'm a very nice closet Virginia Tech fan now because of Mike Young taking over there. But the Hokies, they've got to continue to build and be consistent. If they lose some of these winnable games in ACC play, they could slip into that 5, 6, 7 seed territory, and all of a sudden playing a team that's much more competitive and potentially losing out early in the tournament.
All right, John Denver's West Virginia Mountaineers.
They've got a pretty tough schedule. They've got a 6-game stretch where, they've got Baylor back-to-back. They're at Texas Tech. They're at Texas. And they've got Oklahoma and Kansas at home. So, if they don't take care of those in those games, I think their worst-case scenario is that they're playing themselves, into a low seed and maybe out of the middle.
All right, my home state, Missouri Tigers.
So I've had some nightmares from Missouri in past tournaments when they've had expectations like this. They come in as like a 4 seed, and then I'm like, all right, I'm on the train. They're going to go far, and they lose early. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with them. Again, they have this team that low expectations. They've come in, they've played well. Now they got to be careful not to falter here late in SEC play, and then turn that into early exit in the tournament.
Wisconsin.
Similar theme to West Virginia, 6 games against top 25 teams left. They got to avoid the free fall so that they can have the best seed possible heading into the tournament.
Florida State.
I'll tell you what, Florida State seems like one of those teams that I don't want to say they're wasting their potential, but they're definitely, I think, underachieving a little bit. And maybe that's just me. I had high expectations for them versus where they started the season. So it kind of feels like the Seminoles they've got every opportunity to push up and maybe win the ACC. But if they don't do that, they keep losing to like Georgia Tech, who's not terrible, but it's a game they should win. And then they find themselves with a lower seed than they want.
Matt Waldman's favorite team to tease, UCLA.
I think their worst case scenario is they don't finish top 2 in the Pac-12. Right now, they're leading the Pac-12. They do have 2 games against USC left, their crosstown rival, including this weekend. But, the rest of their schedule is not that daunting. So they should be able to take care of business and either win the Pac-12 outright or worst case scenario, maybe share with USC or finish second. But their worst case scenario would be to slip up and fall down the pecking order to the Pac-12, which would then impact their NCAA seeding as well.
Kansas. may have lost Matt for a second.
I think Matt has Florida.
Oh, he does have Florida. My bad. Florida. Sorry, Matt. I think we may have still lost him, though.
Well, I'll jump on.
Let's skip to Kansas. Why not?
We'll skip to Kansas, but similar type thing. They have at West Virginia. They've got Texas, Texas Tech, and Baylor. If they lose all 4 of them, now their seeding is definitely going to be impacted if that happens.
There he is. All right, Matt. We'll jump back to Florida now, and then you can just go Florida and then straight into Purdue.
Sounds good. I'm sorry for all these internet issues, dealing with the same storm that Steve is. But yeah, Florida, I think, is missing the tournament. They're not safe by any means, I don't think. They continue to be inconsistent, like I talked about earlier when I talked about the West Virginia game. So for every game they can beat against West Virginia, they lose to Mississippi State. So Florida, they're not safe by any means. They could miss the tournament entirely. And Purdue's kind of in a similar boat. They looked well of late, but as we talked about with the Big Ten, it can be a gauntlet. And so there's still a possibility for them to hit a little bit of a snag like Rutgers did earlier and potentially fall to the bubble and miss it.
And then finally, everyone's favorite mid-major to root for and one of only 3 undefeated teams left in the nation, the Drake Bulldogs.
Yeah, they're certainly the darlings, and they could be the darlings heading into the tournament. I think their worst-case scenario is they still got 2 games against Loyola, who's pretty good, and in second place in the MVC. So if they were to get swept by Loyola, maybe split with Evansville, who's 3rd in the conference right now, they could play themselves to the bubble, maybe the playing game, or maybe a situation where they got to win the conference tournament to get to March Madness. And, that would be a dangerous scenario for a team that's the darlings right now, sitting at 16-0 and one of the only 3 unbeaten teams left.
Well, guys, like we said, we like talking about the worst case scenario for teams. Maybe we'll talk about the best case scenarios sometimes, but those are pretty boring, honestly. National championship, conference championship, make it to the Final Four. It's all the same. That's why we think negatively about some of these things. We'll go ahead and take a time out, though. Still to come, though, 3-point play, as well as the stories our panelists are looking forward to in this upcoming week. We'll be right back. This is The Review. Back on The Review, Brendon Hodges and company, going into our 3rd block of the day. Usually, guys, when I put these rundowns together, I have 3 spots for 3 topics. And I figured, why bore people with conversation? And let's do a little more fun stuff. So maybe I'll change it up a little bit later on the road too. But for now, I've made an executive decision, since I am the only executive that has really any say over what we talk about, unless people decide to actually ask us to talk about some stuff, that why don't we do a wild card segment every episode? Today's wild card segment is pretty simple, or I call it drawing a blank. Now, for our audience, think about this like those little Mad Lib books. You'd be driving on a long road trip, you'd have blanks, and you'd be asked for an adjective or a noun and something, and you'd come up with this ridiculous story. This is sort of like that, though it's really just a fill in the blank answer. So we have, I believe, 6 or 7 of those, some of them a little less serious than others, but I'm sure I think these guys know what they are because I sent this rundown to them. If not, though, we'll just start off with the team with the least to gain in the last month of the regular season is who, Matthew?
Gonzaga. They're rolling through the WCC, but one slip up, as Steve mentioned earlier, could really hurt them. So there's not much to gain playing the conference schedule, but a lot to lose.
Steve, do you agree with that?
That was my answer, but I had a second one down, so I'll go with Houston. AC is not entirely tough. They should be able to run the table, and if they do that, they'll maintain their high seed that they have now.
All right, next up, the team with the most to gain in the last month of the regular season is very original in terms of how I went about this. We'll get some more creative ones next time, guys. Sorry about that. Same order, Matt and then Steve.
So I went with Duke. I think the Blue Devils, obviously, they're on the bubble right now, but they still have some matchups to go. Louisville, North Carolina, Virginia. There are opportunities there for them to not only climb back into the tournament, but certainly push their way up the seed line. So I'm not sure they're going to be able to win the ACC at this point, but they have the opportunity to push themselves back up to a higher seed.
I went outside the box. I went with St. Louis. have had a long pause, come back, split a couple games. They're a team that has top 20 talent, has second weekend potential. But how the rest of their season plays out, with the COVID issues that they've had and the amount of games that they're going to have to play, I went with St. Louis.
All right, blank is in the NCAA tournament field right now, but by the time Selection Sunday comes around, they won't be. Just keep going in the same order through these.
So I'm going to go with BYU. So I'm going to go with BYU. I don't have any opportunities other than Gonzaga. And they didn't look good against them the first time. And they've really struggled lately. They lost to Pepperdine, had to beat Pacific in 2 OTs. They're not a team that looks like they're going to march through.
UConn. But I'm going to go with UConn. They got 2 games left with Villanova, tough Big East slate. James Bouknight is injured. Certainly, if they get him back, that could change my theme. But he's going to take a little while to get back into the swing of things. So,
all right, blank isn't in the NCAA tournament field right now, but by the time Selection Sunday comes around, they will be.
So I went ahead with Georgia Tech. The Jackets need their metrics to improve a little bit, but they're looking more and more like the team we kind of thought they were going to be, middle of the road ACC team. And they've already got wins over Florida State, North Carolina, and Clemson, and they played Virginia tough. So they're a team that's starting to look like they're on the upswing, and I think they'll find a way in at the end.
I was originally going to go with Kentucky, but I can't because we know it's going to come down to 3 days in Nashville if they can win the conference tournament. As much as it pains me to say this, I'm going to go with Duke. They're probably not in the tournament right now. I think they've got some winnable games coming down the stretch in the ACC, and they'll play themselves into the field over these last 5 or 6 weeks.
Next up, the conference with the most NCAA tournament teams will be blank. They'll have blank teams in the tournament field.
So I went with the Big Ten, and they're going to get 10 teams in. You kind of got 2 or 3 teams hanging around the bubble in Michigan State, Rutgers, and Maryland. And even Penn State has looked good lately. So I think 2 of those 3 or 4 find a way to give them 10.
I went with the same conference, but I'll go Price is Right lower on you, and I'll go with 9 teams will ultimately punch a ticket to the dance.
All right, the best team that won't make the NCAA tournament is blank.
So I went A-10 this time, and I went Richmond. The Spiders showed so much promise early, but they keep losing head-scratching games to LaSalle. They lost to Hofstra in the non-conference. And even, that Kentucky win doesn't look good anymore. So their best win is Loyola, which isn't terrible, but it's really looking more and more like a resume that's not going to get them in. And it's a shame because they were a team that, again, I think a lot of people saw as a sleeper to make a run in March.
I was going to go with Kentucky again, but I'm not. I'll go with Seton Hall and get our Imperial boss a little upset with us. But,
well, he can't fire everybody. At least 3 people have said that they think because they've bashed Seton Hall, he's going to fire them.
And this is not bashing them. This is actually giving them credit. I think they're a good team. Is their resume going to be good enough? We'll find out over this next month.
All right, and then finally, hopefully you guys will get this reference, but if Coach K answered a question of yours like he did a certain Duke University student journalists, your first thought would be blank.
I put confused. I thought it was a legitimate question, and it really felt like, I know we kind of lectured him, but it felt like he was more just avoiding the question when most coaches have a feeling of how their team is or where they're at after games, even before they look at film or anything else.
I went with, this is great. I'm going to get a lot more Twitter followers out of this.
That's the way right there. I love that answer. All right, well, that's drawing a blank, guys. We're going to move on, though. It's my favorite segment of the day because it's the one that makes everybody scratch their heads and get really mad at me because I take this way too seriously are 3-point, and if they can do good enough, 4-point play. So Matt knows how this works. Steve maybe knows how this works if he's watched one of the episodes or read the rundown in its entirety. But I have 3 questions that make up our 3-point play. They are college basketball related or are part of the timeline of college basketball. There is one change, though, that we're bringing in. We did have 2 mulligans before, but then you can blame Matt Majinski for this, guys. So, yes, Seton Hall, boo, and bash him all you want. Yeah, you had 2 mulligans before, but then he told me it was too easy with 2 during an episode, mind you. And I told him I'm only going to give people 1 from now on. So I'm only going to give you 1 mulligan from now on. That mulligan will turn any question except the 4-point play, if you get to it, into a multiple choice question. I will give you guys a little hint today, though. One of the questions is already multiple choice. I'm not going to tell you which one. You'll just have to wait for it. If you get all 3 questions right, you get a shot at the 4th. Try and convert a 4-point play. And hopefully you don't get that far. But if you do, I will guarantee you will not get this one right. You just won't. It's too hard and there's too much into it. So if you guys are ready, I'll go ahead and tell you the theme of today's 3-point play. If you have watched any of them before or you've studied any of them, you know that I'm pretty fond of basketball history. A lot of the questions come from like the 80s, the 70s, stuff like that. There was even a question about what rule wasn't included in the original rules of basketball. As it turns out today, though, we mentioned a little bit of history, and Matt alluded to this with UCLA. And stories to start, or the biggest stories of this last weekend, UCLA's 88-game winning streak. Now, all 4 questions relate to UCLA's 88-game winning streak. So here we go. Question 1. You already know UC Santa Barbara was the first in a long line of wins for the Bruins. Obviously, they won 88 straight games. Which undefeated team was the second victim for UCLA?
I'll go with Pepperdine.
All right. Matt?
I'll go Kentucky.
All right. Well, I can tell you one of you is closer than the other because one of those schools is in the same state. It was USC. USC was undefeated going into that week. It was actually over a weekend. And I'm not going to tell you who UCLA lost to before they beat Santa Barbara because that's the next question. But yeah, USC was undefeated, and Coach John Wooden said, we're not looking forward to USC because we don't have to anymore. We beat UC Santa Barbara. So we're just moving on. Question 2, though. Winning streaks, they're bookended by losses, obviously. You have to lose before winning streak starts. You have to lose to end the winning streak. In the case of UCLA, though, those losses were suffered to the same team. What team was it?
Notre Dame?
Matt, do you have an answer?
I'm gonna go with San Francisco.
2 very good answers. The only correct one is Notre Dame. That is correct. They well done. Yeah. Now your mulligan doesn't mean anything. I thought you guys would have gotten that because I said there was one multiple choice question in this, and neither of those 2 were. But San Francisco, though, also a really good team during this time period. So a good guess, Matt. Steve on the board with 1, though. No one's going to get to the 4-point play, unfortunately, though this is a pretty good one. So maybe we'll see. Anyway, question 3. So we mentioned this winning streak took place over the course of over 1,000 days. A lot of things happened during 1,000 days, just on a daily basis, historical events. It'd be criminal to ask you to remember everything that happened during that time period. So I just want to focus on the start of the streak. There was a certain space mission planned for that weekend, and all you got to tell me is the name of the mission and where it was going. Actually, you know what? You can.
I got nothing.
Yeah, you can use your mulligans, guys. You have them. Like, I realize
you got to go with the mulligan here.
Yeah. All right. So your choices are A, Apollo 14, the moon; B, Mercury 6, Earth orbit; C, Gemini 10, Earth orbit; or D, Artemis 3, the moon.
When in doubt, pick C. I'll go with C.
I'll go with the Apollo and the Moon.
Matt Waldman, you are correct. It was Apollo 14. I honestly did not know this.
Thought it was too obvious.
I understand that, and yeah, this was a really hard one. I'm very proud of myself for tripping people up, and you'll find this if you come on again soon, Steve. I will not let people off easy. Now, what I'm going to
Brendon,
do,
I like a challenge.
When you said that one was a multiple choice,
yeah,
as someone who is
it was originally, and then I changed the question because it was going to be which one of these things didn't happen. And I was like, that's stupid. Why don't I just, I saw there was a space mission there and I was like, oh yeah, you can just like, that was my bad. I kind of screwed you guys
as a future teacher, I felt like it was one of those, teacher jokes where it's multiple choice because, there's 50 states, for example. So I felt like it was multiple choice because there's X number of Apollo missions.
All right. I am going to since Steve is debutante here, I'm going to give him 30 seconds to convince me why I should let you guys try this 4-point play question. Because it's a doozy. And you're going to need a piece of paper and a pen for it. So I will give you 30 seconds, Steve, to convince me to let you do it.
Well, I think we all like a challenge. The question is, if there's math involved, I got no shot.
There is no math involved.
So let's bring it. All right, let's bring it on then.
Okay. Do you guys have a pen and paper with you?
Go ahead.
All right. So we have mentioned that UCLA beat 45 different teams during their 88-game winning streak. If you remember me saying this as well, 16 of those teams have won a national title in their history, either before that fact or after that fact. Name all 16 teams that have a national title that UCLA beat during their streak. I have 1:55 left on our block clock. I will give you 90 seconds from now to write down as many of them as you can. Go.
All right, Kentucky.
Oh, this list is horrible. Why did I put it like this? No.
All right, Indiana.
Yes, that is one.
North Carolina.
No.
Marquette.
No.
NC State.
Yes.
Houston.
No.
Michigan.
Yes.
Arizona.
No.
Duke.
No.
Louisville.
Yes.
Florida and Arkansas.
Florida and Arkansas. One of those is correct. It is Arkansas. You got 5. Not bad, honestly. Matt, let's hear yours.
All right, so I went with Duke.
That is a
which
no,
I think is
obviously.
wrong. Yeah. San Francisco.
Yes.
I went with Kentucky.
That was a no.
Yep. Michigan State.
No.
I went with Notre Dame. I think they beat him even though they lost to them in the bookend there.
Notre Dame has not won a national championship.
Wasn't sure. North Carolina, which I believe was a no.
That is correct. That was
Arizona.
a no. That's
Arizona
no as
was
well.
a no. Maryland.
Yes. I believe it. Yes,
Right.
There it is.
And this is going to be oddball. I think this is from the old days. Holy Cross.
No.
Stanford.
Yes.
And Villanova is what I had down the last one.
Yes. So Steve won that one 5-4. I'll give him an extra point for that. Would you guys like to know who the 16 teams are according to sportsreference.com that have national championships?
Absolutely. Throw it out.
All right. So Oregon.
Yeah.
They won the first national championship, and that's been mentioned plenty of times. California, Stanford, Kansas. I'm not sure how you guys didn't think Kansas. Villanova, Ohio State, Loyola Chicago, Louisville, Wisconsin, San Francisco, Indiana, Arkansas, Maryland, North Carolina State, Wyoming, which surprised me, honestly, and Michigan. So those are the 16 teams. That was the 3-point play. Steve, congratulations on the win. You're on the board, pretty far behind everyone else, mainly because Matt and Ariel have played way more than everybody else. So if you're looking for a guy who's consistent in terms of getting questions right, Matt here has shown up 2 times. He's gotten 2.5 points on average every time. But yeah, it's been good so far. Thanks for playing, guys. We'll take our last break of the day and we'll close up shop next. Panelists have their stories to look out for this week, and we'll pick some games. Stay with us. This is The Review. Getting set to close up shop here on The Review. Brendon Hodges and company. Just finished our 3-point play. It was a head scratcher for both of these guys, and I was generous again, though nobody scored 4 points, so yay me. Now I get to come up with another 4-point play question, which I already have, and that one is very interesting as well. Anyway, we'll go ahead and kick off with this last block of the episode with stories to start your week. Our panelists have a lot they're looking out for because they're avid college basketball fans, and we like to hear what they're looking for. So here are stories to start your week. We'll start with Matt Waldman and then go with Steve Kirck.
Yeah, so I got 3 things I'm looking for this week. And the first one starts tonight, and that's if Oklahoma can keep it going. With the ranking coming out today, Texas Tech fell back a little bit, but I believe this is their 4th straight game against a top 15 team. And of course, now Oklahoma is a top 10 team themselves. So they're playing at a really high level right now, and they even did so without a few key players on Saturday. So really interested to see how far this team can go in the Big 12 at this point with what they've shown so far. Second thing I'm looking for is how does Iowa respond to adversity? They're on this 2-game losing streak. And this week, I know Michigan State struggled, but I still don't think they're a walkover. And Ohio State certainly isn't a cupcake. So we've seen a few other teams go through some rough stretches in the Big Ten. We'll see if this is Iowa's and how long does it go. And the third one, finally went homer. I couldn't wait any longer. It's Wofford in the SoCon. They have a huge week. East Tennessee State tonight in a semi-makeup game that was pushed back to February 15th back up because of a pause in the Sanford program. And ETSU is in first place. And then they've got their rivalry against that purple team in Greenville on Saturday, which is huge. So those are 2 big games, and they can't overlook VMI in the middle, who they played close, beat close on the road earlier in January. So are they for real? I'm really excited to find out.
All right, I've only got 2 things to look forward to this week, or they're looking ahead to this week, and it's rivalry week. You kind of get to February, and this rivalry week, you got Baylor, Texas tonight, LSU, Alabama Wednesday. Then you get to Saturday with a plethora of rivalry games: North Carolina, Duke, Kentucky, Tennessee, UMass, Rhode Island, Southern Cal, UCLA, Kansas, West Virginia, Florida, and LSU. And then Sunday, you've got Xavier and Nova, and then a nice, what we call in the business, a segue, Cal and Stanford on Sunday is another rivalry game. And that leads to my second thing that I'm not really what I'm looking forward to, just curious about. There are actually 4 college basketball games being played Sunday, tipping after 5 o'clock. Isn't there a big football game being played on Sunday? So you got, Quinnipiac and Fairfield, Cincinnati and Tulane, Villanova, actually William and Mary and Omaha, and Cal and Stanford all playing when the biggest football game of the year is going on. Just something that I found curious.
That's a very good point. I didn't even think to put that down, but I'm going to have to for stories to start your weekend on Friday. I'm going to throw in a story here that I'm looking forward to as well, and I'm going to shout out my sister who goes to Bellarmine University, the new darling of the ASUN. They lost their first 2 conference games to Lipscomb, close, mind you. They haven't lost in the ASUN since, and they're playing Jacksonville this weekend. Scott Davenport. And I didn't know much about Bellarmine besides the fact that my sister goes there. When this whole podcast thing started, they are a very technically sound and very willing basketball team. They share the ball. I've watched a couple of their games, and they're constantly moving. They're not running circles around these ASUN teams, but they're taking advantage of their opportunities. And if they didn't have that 4-year period where they can't go to the NCAA tournament, they'd probably be one of the favorites to come out of the A-Sun to be able to get there in their first year in D1. So love watching Bellarmine. Sis, that was for you. Don't say I never did anything for you. We'll go ahead and move on to game picks, though. I don't have Bellarmine in there because there are two mid-majors that I'm very fond of, the Citadel and Bellarmine, for whatever reason. I don't know why the Citadel. I just always use them for picks because they had pretty interesting games. Don't have them in the pick segment today, but I do have Matt's Wofford Terriers, the home of the man, the myth, the legend, Fletcher McGee. Not there anymore. But like you said, Matt, they have a couple games against ETSU later this week. They have one tonight, actually, and who will win this game, Wofford or ETSU, and what's the score? Let's go with Steve first and then Matt, and we'll just keep going that way throughout the entire pick segment.
Gosh, I'm a fan of Matt, so I'm going to go with Wofford. No question. I'll say 79-71. Go Wofford.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise who I'm going to pick here. Look, all credit to the Buccaneers. They're, I think, a little overachieving as well this year, as is Wofford. So this is really a great matchup. Terriers 71-68. Wofford is tough to beat at home, crowd or no crowd.
I agree. The Buccaneers are very overachieving this year, especially with Tom Brady and Antonio Brown and all that stuff they put together on their roster. I'm sorry. That's the big football game we're talking about this weekend. Steve, if you were a fan of Matt, you wouldn't have shaved your facial hair today like you mentioned before the show. Then we all could have been bearded brothers up here. Anyway, the only other game we have from Monday's slate, Texas Tech taking on Oklahoma, Big 12 matchup, ranked teams facing off. Texas Tech, 10th in the nation, led by Matt's favorite player to hate, Mac McClung, and not you, Matt Majinski. And Oklahoma, like you said, can they keep it going? Steve, will they keep it going?
They are not going to keep it going. I'm going to say Texas Tech rides the momentum of scoring the last 12 points and beating LSU on Saturday, and Oklahoma kind of runs into a wall. This gauntlet of a 5-game stretch takes too much out of them. Texas Tech 80, Oklahoma 70.
I'm gonna flip that around. I'm gonna say they are going to keep it going. When teams get hot, sometimes it can be hard to break that. So I'm gonna go Oklahoma 68-64.
All right, this next game could possibly be the game of the weekend. It's not often that you say that about a game in the Big 12. The Big 12 in past years has been kind of like, oh, are they really that good at basketball? They're more of a football conference. And even in this episode, we've seen some shade thrown at them, saying, I believe somebody here said they were maybe a little bit weak, not as strong as other conferences. Don't remember who that was, but I remember hearing it. Anyway, Texas, top 5 in the nation. Baylor, second-ranked team in the nation, one of 3 undefeateds. Will Baylor's undefeated streak continue?
Yes, Baylor wins. They'll keep it going. Probably a high-scoring game. I'll say 88-81.
Yeah, I got to go with Baylor as well. Texas is good. I don't think they're Baylor good. 81-69 Bears.
All right, next up out of the ACC, Clemson taking on North Carolina. North Carolina is kind of a team that I don't feel like everybody's talking that much about, even though they're a very storied program. They've kind of flown under the radar, and they're still pretty good. Way better than last year with all that happened with them injury-wise. And that year is really forgotten now because there was no tournament for them to miss. So will North Carolina keep being steady Eddie and win this one?
Yeah, I'm not a believer in Clemson, and they're on a little bit of the schneid, although they have won one or two lately. But I'll go with Carolina, 74-62.
So last season, I will not forget for the Tar Heels. That was another Wofford win in Chapel Hill. They're 2-1 all time against North Carolina in Chapel Hill. But I am going to go with the Tar Heels in this one. Clemson has looked god awful. They came off their own paws, and it's just not been the same team. Tar Heels 74-64.
I love how we just throw shade at teams who had massive injury bugs, and Wofford beat North Carolina in Chapel Hill. They're 2-1. Oh my goodness. Oh, it's an in-state rival, Matt. Get over it. It doesn't. There's no real home court advantage there. Their fans travel. Here are some fans that may not be able to travel as well because they're on opposite ends of the state of California. Stanford hosting USC. And actually, I believe this is Stanford's first real home game this year because I had this in the episode for Friday that we weren't able to do. Stanford the county just lifted their restrictions on high contact sports. They're able to play at home now. So congratulations, Stanford. This may be your first real home game of the year.
I'm going to say the Cardinals start off 0-1. I'm going with USC. I think they're right there with UCLA as one of the top two teams in the league. Stanford's had some good wins lately, but I'm going to ride the Trojans here.
We may have lost him again. Matt, can you hear me? I think we may have lost him. We'll skip to, oh, wait. This happens to me a lot too, where I just and I was hosting a meeting and I dropped out and came back in at least 5 or 6
And you were
times.
hosting?
Yeah. I mean,
Oh.
Full disclosure to any of you watching this, we won't cut this part out because this is just hilarious. I believe it was a couple Fridays ago, our midseason awards show, I kept dropping in and out of the meeting because I didn't realize I wasn't fully connected to Matt Majinski's internet. And I didn't realize that until we were exporting the video and it got out late because I was stupid and did not realize that. Matt should be back in a minute, but we'll go ahead and move on to Wednesday's action. Usually this game on the football side ends up being 9-6, 9-3 when it comes to national championships. Then again, Nick Saban and Les Miles won't be coaching in this one, so maybe there'll be a little more scoring, especially since it's basketball. But SEC rivals, Alabama, LSU.
I think the 9 and the 6 are the made 3-pointers in this contest, not the total points scored. And the way Alabama shoots threes, I'm going to go with them. High scoring affair. Alabama, let's say 87-84. Close game.
Yeah, I do think Alabama pulls through as well. They're going to find a way to bounce back. 84-76.
Now, this next game, I'm going to full disclosure here. We realize, Matt, that you're insufferable when it comes to Wofford. I would like to say that I am not insufferable when it comes to the school that I am taking graduate school from, Syracuse. For our boss man, though, there are two teams that he will always say will win every game, and those are Seton Hall and Syracuse. Syracuse plays Louisville this week, actually on Wednesday. So Louisville they were ranked 25th in the nation when I put this list together. They aren't ranked anymore since we didn't talk about them earlier, but who wins, Syracuse or Louisville?
I know about context clues and I can take a hint. So I'm going Syracuse 75-71 over Louisville.
What do you mean context clues? I just said I wasn't insufferable when it came to them. My sister
Look,
goes
let
to
me
school
tell
in
you.
She goes to Bellarmine, but it's in Louisville, and she talks about UL all the time. So I don't have a rooting interest here. Yes, I go to Syracuse. My sister goes to school in Louisville. I'm impartial.
Keep in mind, I'm a Kentucky fan, so go Syracuse.
That's fair. Yes, that is very fair.
For as insufferable as I may come across, I'm at least realistic that Wofford is not going to the Sweet 16 this year. There are times where Matt seems like he believes Syracuse is like a 5 seed right now, and we know they're not.
I'm sure you think Wofford will be in the Sweet 16 if they win a tournament game. You're going to say it at one point. Make your pick.
Hey, look, 69-60 Louisville.
Thank you. On to Thursday, more ranked action. A lot of games out of the Big Ten on Thursday. Iowa hosting Ohio State.
I'm going to go with Iowa. They're going to get off the schneid. Matt mentioned they lost 2 games in a row, and they'll get back in the win column. They'll beat Ohio State, and Iowa likes to score points, so I'll go high scoring game 90-81.
Yeah, so I kind of think the slide's going to continue. Ohio State's really looked impressive the last couple games. It's going to be close, and I still think it's a toss-up, but I'm going to go Buckeyes 85-83.
The other Big Ten game I have locked in for this pick segment, Rutgers and Minnesota. This is an interesting game for me. I mean, I went to school in Minnesota. Again, don't have any partiality to any of these teams here, guys. I just put them down if the if it looks like it's going to be a close game. And this one should be, because they're two teams right in the middle of the Big Ten who are fighting for perhaps a chance to go to the tournament. So is it Rutgers or is it Minnesota?
This one for me comes down to who do I trust and who do I not trust. I trust Steve Pikiell. I trust Rutgers. I don't trust Minnesota. So I like Rutgers to win this game 75-65.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting matchup. The Gophers have slid off the radar a little bit lately. Rutgers had that same thing happen to them earlier this year. They seem to have turned around a little bit. But I have to switch the other way. I trust Minnesota a little bit more. I'm going to go 70-65 Gophers.
And then finally, from a conference that we haven't really picked, I don't think we picked a game from this conference this year. So welcome to the program, the Big Sky, ladies and gentlemen. I had a friend whose brother went to Montana State. They're visiting Weber State this weekend. Weber State, obviously, home of a very, very skilled NBA player. I'll let you say his name, audience, because you know who it is. And Montana State, they're both pretty good in the Big Sky this year. Montana State actually undefeated in conference play this year, 6-0. Weber State 4-2, looking to gain a game on the conference leaders. Who wins the Big Sky matchup?
Not going to lie, Big Sky isn't usually on my radar, but I'll say Montana State stays undefeated in the Big Sky, and they pull out a win 80-60 over Weber State.
And this one is right in my wheelhouse, Brendon, as you know, big mid-major person overall. So metrics really like Weber State, even though they've got a couple losses in the Big Sky. Obviously, as you said, Montana State's undefeated and been a bit of a surprise this year. I do think Weber State gets it done, hands them that first loss of the year, 75-71. But that race out there is going to be a lot of fun. You've got those two, Southern Utah and Eastern Washington, all battling it out.
Four teams that we don't pay attention to a lot, but we find them on the scores tab of various college basketball websites and put them in the pick segment. Well done, guys. That's all we got for you on this episode of The Review, though. Steve, Matt, thanks for joining us. If you guys want to keep up with videos, check out our YouTube page. It's at CBB Review. We're working on the actual review Instagram pages and stuff. We have plenty of time to figure that out, guys. We'll get that out to you as soon as possible. And we'll have another episode for you on Friday. Who knows if these two guys will be here, but I will, and that's all that matters. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining us. This has been The Review. Take care. Have a great week of watching college basketball, and we'll see you on Friday as we head into next weekend. Take care.